Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to try and close this day. It's been a long day. I'm going to start with this quote. This is one of my favorites. In 1998, they asked Bill Gates to do a visionary quote, and he said, "Eventually, everyone's business card is going to have an email address." That's not even 20 years ago. I'll be very honest, if you meet somebody here today and they give you a business card and it doesn't have an email address, there's only one conclusion: that person must be bloody rich. That is the only logical conclusion after 20 years. We live in this world where we're constantly online. Technology isn't special anymore, it's really normal. And selfies are almost the exemplary function of that. Sometimes we cross boundary. What we see is that this is, for example, a radiologist selfie. This is clearly taking it one step too far. I think we're actually on a transition. We're only halfway there. I remember the old normal. This is an ad from 1980 when there was a 10 megabyte hard disk on sale for $3,495. And in those days, technology was actually easy to sell. I mean, I'm a technologist. We would introduce technology to users. Users had no idea how to use technology in those days. And in many cases, they even had a completely wrong way of using technology, often with disastrous consequences as a result. You feel sorry for the guy, but he doesn't actually work in healthcare anymore. I think we're on that transition from old normal to new normal, and it's amazing to see how some of these consequences are absolutely completely normal in our behavior. This is one of my favorite examples of that. This is a Santa Claus letter that a young girl wrote to Santa saying, "Dear Santa, how are you? I'm good. Here's what I want for Christmas," and then the Amazon URL of exactly what she wants to have under the Christmas tree. And I think this is exactly where we are. It's the first opening line of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It's the best of times, we see amazing opportunities, but it's the worst of times. We see as companies that we have difficulty in capturing all the information that our customers or patients are actually putting out there. Time is ticking, and the real insight actually isn't happening. But I think the most fundamental is we're getting into a world where everything is connected, and that is not an easy thing. I'm an engineer. This is the first week of engineering school. This is what every engineer needs to study. It's the linear pendulum. It's simple and it's elegant. And then they unhinge one hinge, and what happens then is nothing short of spectacular. It's the same mass, it's the same volume, but because the two forces are now connected together, it becomes a dynamic system. And what is interesting is the resulting motion is completely ununderstandable for our linear brains. You're all looking at that going, huh? I mean, how does that work? And these are only two things connected together. What will happen in an economy where the network is now connecting everything to everything? It basically means linear doesn't work anymore. It means that things are accelerating and going faster. And that's one of the reasons why I love being out there in Silicon Valley. I spend almost half of my time in Silicon Valley. You see things that are amazing. This is a company that I spend a lot of time with. This is a company called Skydio. These people build autonomous drones. These people build drones that fly themselves, and they avoid trees and obstacles. And these people say driverless cars is so 2013. But a drone where you have to balance the weight versus intelligence ratio, that is really exciting. And this is why I love being there. You see the thunder of disruption. You feel that technology is going to fundamentally change things. And I get really excited by that. But then they put me in front of a board of directors of a hospital, for example, and these people often don't see the same excitement of technology that I do. And I think this is exactly what we have to figure out. You've seen amazing things today, but the question is, when do you have to move? There's a fundamental theory about this called optionality. This is any idea or any concept or any model. You start something, you grow, you peak, and you decline. This is the cycle of life. When do you have to think about the next thing? Not when it's going down, that's too late. Not even when you're at your peak, that's too late. What you have to do is when you're actually doing really good, that's when you have to reinvent yourself. That's when you have to figure out what your next move is going to be, and then you can keep reinventing yourself. That is this optionality. And I started playing around with that. I developed a theory called the day after tomorrow, and I would like to conclude the day with that theory. It's so stupid that it's actually going to stick in your mind. And what I want you to think about is, if you look at companies, organizations in time, attention, budget, talent, and you look at value creation, I want you to think about three buckets: today, tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow. What is today? You spend a lot of time in today. Today is the 112 emails that you get on Monday morning you didn't even know you were going to have the Friday night before. What is tomorrow? Tomorrow is Budget 2017. And many of us work in companies where we have to do budgets, and we spend a lot of time thinking about Budget 2017, and when we actually have the Budget 2017, everybody agrees that it's completely outdated, but we spend some time in tomorrow. And then there is the day after tomorrow. Ideas, concepts, business models, technologies that could really, really change and move the needle. How much of your time do you spend in today, how much in tomorrow, and how much in the day after tomorrow? And many people say to me, 70-20-10. If it's 70-20-10, you're actually doing fine. But this is like New Year's resolutions. 2nd of January, I'm going to eat less. I'm going to exercise more. This is the New Year's resolutions every Monday morning when you drive to work. You think, I'm going to spend 70-20-10. When you drive on Friday night back to home, you think it wasn't 70-20-10. It was actually 93-7-0. And if it's 70-20-10, you're fine. If it's 93-7-0, you're in trouble. Because if you look at value creation, of course today is important. This is current value. Of course tomorrow is important. That is future value. But those ideas, concepts, business models, and technologies that are in the day after tomorrow, they could really transform your organization and help you in that optionality to completely rethink what you do. If it's 70-20-10, you're fine. If it's 93-7-0, you're basically screwed. Think about this. For you, your team, your company, your brand. As you can imagine, this is the simplest model in the world. And I was severely disappointed about a month ago. I did a workshop with a big Japanese company. And after a whole day spending really interesting work on that with this Japanese company, the CEO came up to me and said, "Thank you very much for the workshop, Mr. Hinssen, but your model is wrong." And I said, "How can this be wrong? This is the dumbest model in the world." And I'll never forget it. This was on a blackboard. He took a big red marker and he drew something on that and he said, "This is what you forgot." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "This is the shit of yesterday that we have to clean up." And it creates negative value. And this is what I want you to think about when you go home. You've seen amazing things that could help your company into this day after tomorrow, but what is your balance in your company between the shit of yesterday and the day after tomorrow? And if you don't get that right, you're fundamentally not going to even make it to the day after tomorrow. And I spend all my time worrying and thinking exactly about that. How do you organize for the day after tomorrow? And let's be honest, healthcare in the day after tomorrow is nothing short of spectacular. This is what we've done all day. We've looked at things that are tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Let's be honest, we've seen things that there is no average patient anymore. In healthcare in the future, there is no average patient. We're going to see that more and more reactive is out and proactive is in. Just like dentistry 50 years ago was about pulling teeth, now it's about making sure that your teeth don't actually get sick anymore. And what we see more and more is that the traditional players are not the trusted players. We see the community playing a much more active role. And that means that 4 things in healthcare are fundamentally going to change. 1, what we know, what we measure, how we act, and how we treat. What we know. Daniel talked about this. Look at what we've seen. 5 years ago, you could do a 23andMe test for $99, which did only a partial analysis of your DNA. But just 2 weeks ago, we now have Veritas, which for $1,000 does your complete, full human genome. Just 16 years ago, Craig Venter was the first person to decode a human genome, and it cost $100 million. Now, 16 years later, it's $1,000. And not just our genetics, our microbiomes, the other 93% DNA in our body are going to be something that we know everything. So what we know is fundamentally changing. Then, number 2, what we measure. Everything you see on this picture, everything that you see on this slide is something that will be in a wearable just 2 years from now. And that's why we have the Google X working with Novartis to build things like glucose monitors into diabetes, into our contact lenses. What we know changes, what we measure, and how we act. This is going to be the biggest fundamental shift in healthcare. What we're going to see more and more is that this is the new reality. The patient will see you now. Patient centricity becomes the leading game in healthcare of tomorrow. And finally, how we treat. We're now going to be able to make drugs specifically for you. That's why the FDA in the US has recently gone to a mechanism called precision FDA, because the way that we make drugs today based on averages is about as medieval as bloodletting. And that's what is going to change in the next couple of years. So what we know, what we measure, how we act, how we treat is going to change. And that's even getting started. The most amazing company I know today in Silicon Valley is called Calico. It was founded by the people who founded Genentech. Genentech was the leading bio company in the US, California-based, did a lot of drug research on cancer, and it was sold recently, a couple of years ago, to Roche, the Swiss company. And this man was actually the CEO and the chairman of Genentech. He's also, by the way, the chairman of Apple. This is Arthur Levinson. He is the most interesting person in healthcare in Silicon Valley today, because he founded Calico together with Google, and what they say is, you know, I spent my whole life building drugs to cure people who are sick. And then he sells his company to Roche and he becomes a billionaire. And what do billionaires do now? They don't go to the Bahamas, they say, let's do something really cool. He founds Calico and he says, you know what? Instead of making drugs to treat people who are sick, let's make sure that people don't die anymore. Wow, that's really cool. The horrible thing about these people is you can never win on a cocktail party. If you meet them outside and you say, well, what do you do? And they say, well, I cure death. Well, what can you say, right? I mean, I don't know what you do, but you can't beat that. Healthcare is going to the day after tomorrow faster than ever before. What we know, what we measure, how we act, how we treat, that is going to change. And that's why I like to observe how do you do that. Let me give you one example. This is Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson is the biggest healthcare product company in the world. You've all used their products, but some of their products are now under attack. For example, Johnson's baby shampoo is under heavy attack at this moment because recently it was discovered that some of the ingredients might be actually causing cancer. That is the shit of yesterday that Johnson & Johnson has to focus on. The current portfolio of Johnson & Johnson is the widest array of healthcare products, and 99% of the people at J&J, they worry about today. And their number one customers, hospitals. And they're trying in tomorrow to reinvent it to actually have more of the same, more efficiently and more elegantly. But what about the day after tomorrow? The day after tomorrow is fundamentally different. Today, the number one customers of Johnson & Johnson is hospitals. And if you ask the CEO of a hospital, what is the number one KPI of a hospital today? It's the occupancy of the beds. But what is interesting is this man is running the day after tomorrow of Johnson & Johnson. This guy is Diego Miralles. He's based in San Diego, in La Jolla, actually. And he says, I don't care about today. I don't care about tomorrow. I only work at J&J to reinvent for the day after tomorrow. And that's why he invests as an individual in things like 23andMe. That's why he invests in building robot surgery together with Google, because he says, I only do the day after tomorrow. Now what is interesting, he's based in San Diego, in La Jolla, which is a really beautiful place. And what is interesting, it's 5 hours by plane away from the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson. It's 3 time zones away, because he says, if I would be doing the day after tomorrow in the headquarters of Johnson & Johnson, I would have to spend 97% of my time on corporate politics to explain myself to the people who are focused on today and tomorrow. That's why I have my 300 people in San Diego. So think about this. Startups, you've seen a lot of really cool technology, but this startup mentality, and I like to use this mentality to round it off. Many companies today are plantations. I have done my life in startups. Startups live in the rainforest. The rainforest is a really scary place. You can get bitten by a snake and you die instantly. The mortality rate in a startup is 97%. But most traditional companies are plantations. I mean, if you run a banana plantation, you wake up every morning thinking bananas, and you go to bed thinking bananas, and you think about more bananas, and more yield with bananas, and more productivity bananas. But the chances, if you run a banana plantation, that you ever think of anything else except bananas is zilch. And what many of these plantations do is they want to buy startups. But the problem is that doesn't work. It doesn't work because the rules of the rainforest and the rules of the plantation are completely different. The rules on how you live in the rainforest as a startup are fundamentally different. And that's why I think the _1 issue is not going to be technology, it's going to be about people and culture. Many traditional companies, many healthcare companies, many healthcare organizations are still run in a very traditional way. And that's why we have a situation where if we introduce new things, it doesn't work. The resistance to new ideas is a function of the number of employees to the power of the number of management levels. And that's exactly why many companies in healthcare are having org charts that are starting to look exactly like this. I see people taking pictures. I'll send you the slides. I see people starting to put names on that. That's not the idea, but this is the fundamental problem. How are you going to go home after an exciting day like this with all these new possible things that could get you into the day after tomorrow? And I'll give you one last tip. Many companies, certainly in healthcare, they are big organizations. They're traditional organizations. They have a board of directors. And the board of directors has a subgroup, which is the audit committee. And who is in the audit committee of a company? The most boring people in the world. It's true. Certainly in healthcare. And we need them because we need to make sure that we don't lose patients and we don't kill anybody. The people in the audit committee are there to make sure that you follow the rules, that you color inside the lines. But let me give you one tip. If you want to reinvent yourself in the day after tomorrow, as a countermeasure to your audit committee, maybe you should have a disruption committee where you put your wildest thinkers, your most restless people who are constantly thinking, what could you do to color outside the lines to actually reinvent yourself for the day after tomorrow? Let me end with 3 tips. 1, many big corporations here in healthcare, from time to time, unlearn that. Learn to think with the power of a startup. 2, don't try to innovate on your own. This is the age of networks. This is the age of ecosystems. Innovate with the power of a network. And finally, and I know this is really difficult, don't over-strategize. This is the greatest strategic thinker of the 20th century. This is Professor Iron Mike Tyson, and I think he nailed it when he said, everybody has a strategy until they punch you in the face. That is what I do not wish that happens to you. I wish you a lot of success. I hope you had an amazing day, and I really hope that you make it into the day after tomorrow. Thank you very much. Thank you.